Negotiating is one of the most powerful tools you can have as a reseller. Done correctly, it can add thousands of dollars to your bottom line every year. Done incorrectly, and you can become the person no one likes and no one wants to do deals with. In today's video, I'm going to give you 15 tools that I use when negotiating deals as a reseller. And make sure you stick around to the end because the last one will guarantee that you will never lose a negotiation ever again. If you are like me, you have probably thought about how to balance getting a good deal without offending or ruining the relationship with the other person. I see this a lot in comments on YouTube videos of people that go to yard sales. The comment section will be filled with things like, if you know it's worth $100, why didn't you pay her more? Did you really have to negotiate that? I see your margins, they're huge. Well, the truth is if you're at a yard sale, negotiation is common practice at almost every yard sale. Most people expect to negotiate prices at a yard sale. Most people that are having the yard sale price their items with negotiations in mind. And a lot of times you'll walk up and you'll see price tags and people will even say, hey, don't be afraid of the price. I'm open to negotiations. People will say this because they price their items very high and they might have actually had some traffic come through, look at things and walk away, and they're starting to question whether they've price their items too high to start with. The truth is if you can save $1 on every item you buy and you sell thousands of items a year, that will really add up. I like to remember that I make my money during the purchase of the product, not during the sale of the product. Once I'm selling the item, I already have my money invested in this item and the market is going to determine the value. I'm going to have to take offers, I'm going to have to pay eBay fees, and I'm going to have to ship this item out. I'm going to have to run the risk of returns. So I have to make sure that when I purchase an item at a yard sale, that it's at a fair price, not only for the person selling it, but it's at a fair price for me and for my future customers that I'm going to resell the item to. If I pay max dollar for everything, I'm going to have to charge max dollar on eBay in order to make any kind of profit. And if I can't make profit on an item, I'm out of business. Before we go over the 15 tools that I use during negotiations, I want to share a quick story about how I had my negotiation tactics actually reversed and used on me. I was at a yard sale a couple weekends ago and I was walking around and the guy was super friendly. He was talking to me the entire time I was there. He had an item there that I was interested in. However, he had it priced at $30. With my margins, I could pay a maximum of $20. Before I left, I shot him that offer. I said, hey man, would you be willing to do $20 on this item? And he immediately shot back, I can do $25. Now, $25 was outside of my price point, and I knew that I needed to walk if it was anything more than $20 because the margin wasn't going to be quite what I wanted, even at $25. Instinctively, I just paused and I didn't say anything. He fired back immediately and he said, hey man, I've been sitting out here all day long. It's super hot. I'm super thirsty and $5 will get me a beer. Don't you want to buy me a beer? I actually laughed. I thought this was super funny. It was a great way to make me laugh and kind of forget about the negotiation that was going on. I said, yeah, you're right, no problem. And I actually pulled out another $5 and paid him $25. You might think, oh wow, like you must have been mad because you got tricked into giving him an extra $5. But I wasn't. I was actually glad that I had a nice conversation with the guy. I was glad that I was able to help him out. I still had some profit margin on that item, but at the end of the day, I actually overpaid, but I wasn't mad. This is the exact feeling you're aiming for when you're negotiating at yard sales. You might think that in order for you to win a negotiation, the other person has to lose. However, that's just not true. Did you guys know that this is a 3-part video series on everything about yard sales? So if you haven't checked out the first 2 parts, I highly suggest that after this video, you go and watch those videos as they're going to show you where to find the best yard sales. And once you're at those yard sales, where to find the best items at those yard sales. The link to those videos will be in the description below. Quick disclaimer before we get into the 15 tools. I am not some kind of sales guru. I'm not some guy that's going to teach you some magical skill where you're going to say a key phrase and they're going to come out and just give you all the items for free. I'm not trying to trick anyone into selling things that they don't want to sell. I'm not trying to steal stuff from people. These are actual tips that I have used out in the real world that have helped me negotiate fair deals with other people at yard sales. These tips have worked well for me, however, they might not be perfect for you, and they're not perfect for every situation. In fact, I don't negotiate at probably over 50% of yard sales. The prices are just fine and I'm more than willing to pay a fair price. However, if the price point is slightly more than I can pay, I will try one or a couple of these tactics to see if I can get a better deal and try to close the deal. If you try a few of these tips and they're not working for you, just know it takes a lot of practice to get good at this, and it takes a lot of practice to go out and be willing to ask people for things for less money than they are. Tool number one, be friendly. Now, I talked about this in the second video about how the sellers at these yard sales don't owe you anything. They're there on their day off, probably on a Saturday, selling things around their house. They probably don't even know what reselling is, and they're just there trying to get rid of stuff. They don't owe you this stuff. You shouldn't go in there with the mindset of you're stealing this stuff from them. They're so stupid. You're going to make a killing off of them. That is the wrong mindset. You want to go in and you want to be as friendly as possible and make it genuine. If you're continuing to try to negotiate and you're not getting anywhere with people, ask yourself if you're being friendly enough. Because at the end of the day, no one wants to give a great deal to someone that's super grumpy. Number two, pay a fair price. Now, I'm in the business of reselling, so I have to hit my margins in order to make a purchase. So I'm not saying don't negotiate. Obviously, this video is about negotiations. In most cases, most people are open to negotiations at yard sales. And the worst thing that someone can say is, no, I'm firm on the price. Oh well, you at least tried, you gave it a shot. However, this doesn't mean you should beat people up over the price. For me, if it's a great deal, I'm going to pay the price and move on. I'm not going to sit there and negotiate $1 or $2 off just because I think I can. If it's a fair price, I would rather pay for the item and get it in my car and move on to the next sale than sit there and go back and forth over a few dollars. Now, if the few dollars is going to make or break whether I can buy the item and whether I'm profitable on the item or not, then I might go down that rabbit hole and start the negotiation process. But don't be the guy at the yard sale when someone says the item is $1 and you start saying, well, will you take 25 cents? Other people see this and it's just going to give off bad energy. You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be known as that guy. And for most of us, you're going to be going to the same yard sales year over year. So if you go to a yard sale this year and you beat someone up on the price, they might remember you the following year when you show up and you want another great deal. They're going to be like, oh man, here comes that guy that like really beat us up last year and just wouldn't take no and just kept asking if we would take 25 cents instead of $1 on every single item. You don't want to be known as that guy. This brings me into rule number 3, and it's the 50% rule. Now, you don't have to follow this, but this rule works very well for me. I refuse to start negotiations if I have to start the negotiations at less than 50% of what they're asking. I have typically found that if I'm starting at less than 50% of what they are originally asking, it's not going to go anywhere. People are going to get offended, and you're going to ruin your reputation. So for me, if someone's asking $100 for an item and I know personally the most I can spend on it is $20, I'm not even going to say that $20 offer. I just find that sometimes people think their items are worth more than they are, and there's no reason to go into this whole story of being like, why would you think it's worth $100? The most I could pay you is $20. Won't you take $20? That's not going to go anywhere. That's not a negotiation tactic that you're going to win. So for me, I'm not going to offer anything less than 50%. Number 4, know your top price. This goes hand in hand with paying a fair price. If you don't know what your profit margins are, you can't determine what a fair price is. And if you can't determine what a fair price is for the item, you have no business starting negotiations. If you don't know what your profit margins are or how much you can spend on an item, I highly recommend checking out this video here where I break down how you can determine what your profit margins are so you have a place to start negotiations from. Think of a car dealership. A car dealership wants to sell you a car. When you walk in the door, they want you leaving with a car. They want you signing that line and leaving with a car. However, they have margins that they have to hit. Just because someone comes into a car dealership and they're a great negotiator and they're going to pull out all the stops doesn't mean that they're going to get what they want. It means that they can get a fair price. So being good at negotiations will get you a fair price. It's not going to make it so that you pay nothing for items. And the car dealership knows this. The car dealership knows that we have a $2,000 margin here that we can play with. We have a $1,000 profit margin here we can play with. And that's where they play ball within that. If you go into a car dealership and you say, I want this $50,000 car for $10,000, they're not even going to entertain you because you're not a serious buyer. And the same goes for yard sales. If you're out at the yard sale and you don't know what the max is that you can pay, how are you going to negotiate? Because you don't know what your room is. You don't know where your margins are. Number 5, know your customer. Now, I talked about this in part 2. However, when you're at a yard sale, you need to be doing some digging and you need to figure out why these people are having the yard sale, what they're doing with the items. You need to be asking questions and you need to be making observations so that you have knowledge on why they're selling these items, and this will help you with your negotiations. So for me, are they moving? Are they running out of space in their garage? Are they just spring cleaning? Do they have to get rid of these items? Are they going to end up going to donations if they're not purchased at a yard sale? These are things I want to know. And then I can start negotiations from there. So a perfect example is if someone's moving, I might say something along the lines of, hey, I don't think this item's going to fit in your moving truck. Do you want to work a deal on it? But you can't ask any of these questions if you don't know why they're getting rid of the items. So you have to do a little bit of digging and just say, hey, spring cleaning, or wow, it looks like you're moving. Is there a for sale sign out front? Do they have a moving truck? Do they have a dumpster sitting out there? Or sometimes they might even say, hey, make me deals because I'm tired. It's the end of the day and I don't want to put things away. So then you can say, hey, this is really heavy. I know you don't want to pull it in the garage later, so let's make a deal on it. Number 6, never give the first price. This is pretty basic strategy, but typically if you throw out the first number, you're going to lose the negotiation. Now, there are some exceptions to this, one being if I can only pay $1 or $2 for an item, I'm not going to even waste time of trying to negotiate $1 or $2. So if they say, hey, what do you want to pay for it, or what do you think it's worth, I'll say $1 or $2 and we'll go from there. If the item is, say, more expensive than a couple bucks, then I'm going to want them to throw out that first number. The other place that I don't use this tactic is at fundraising events. So if you're at a fundraiser event and they're just asking for donations, what I like to do is be as generous as I can with still being within my margins. Now, it does me no good to go to a fundraiser sale and spend a bunch of business money buying things that I'm not going to make any money on. So I still have to stick to my margins, but I'm not going to sit there and negotiate at a fundraising event. I'm going to throw out the number that I can actually afford to pay, and I'm going to err on the side of being generous. However, outside of those 2 use cases, I will almost never throw out the first number. The reason being is that they could throw out a lower number than I think that they ever would. I could know that this item is a $100 item, but to them, they don't even think it's worth $5. So I don't want to throw out $50 and they say, oh, okay, yeah, we'll take $50. Even though that might have been within my price margin, I'm going to wait and see what number they throw out. Now, some people will push you and say, well, I don't really know what it's worth. You tell me, and they'll keep pushing and trying to get an answer out of me. When this happens, I like to say, oh man, you don't want me naming the prices around here because I'm super cheap and I'm going to sell it all to myself for $1 or $2. This kind of throws it right back in their court because at the end of the day, how can I name the price that I'm going to pay? Like, if you want me to name the prices at your yard sale, I'm going to say everything's 25 cents. I don't recommend saying this in a hostile way, but say it in a funny way of like, hey, I'm really cheap. I don't think you want me naming your prices around here. That will also help them when they go to name the price. They're like, well, this guy's kind of cheap. I don't want to seem like I'm expensive, so I want to give him a good, fair price. And honestly, a lot of times when they give that next number, they're going to go lower than they originally were going to, just because they now know that you're so-called cheap. Number 7, create a pile. Creating a pile is a great way to try to get the price point down on a lot of things. If you show up to a yard sale and there's a bunch of stuff that you're interested in buying, I highly recommend trying the pile method. Now, the first step is to always ask. Don't be the weirdo that grabs a bunch of stuff and starts squirreling it away behind their house or under their table or something. You don't want to be that guy. So the first thing I say is, hey, do you mind if I make a pile over here? And I've actually never been told no, so I don't think that's even a thing. They'll say, yeah, of course. They might even say, hey, you can put it over here, or I'll watch it over here, whatever it is. So if I'm making a pile, the goal is to get a pile price. It does me no good to make a pile of stuff and then have them take the pile apart and say, this was $2, this was $3, this was $5, and they start typing it into their calculator and they're adding up the pile. This does happen, and sometimes it's unavoidable. However, the first way to avoid this is make the pile on the ground. 9 times out of 10, most people don't want to bend over get on the ground and start doing a bunch of math. If you make the pile on a table, it's a lot easier for them to start sorting and digging through it, where if it's down on the ground, they now have to bend over and start adding everything up. The next thing is if they start naming prices, they're like, this was $5, this is $3. I'll just say something like, hey, how much for everything? Or can we make a bulk price? Can we make a pile price? Anything along those lines to get them to stop thinking about the individual items and the overall pile. Now, sometimes they might look at a pile and they'll throw out a huge number and you're like, I don't even know how they got to that number. What I like to do in this situation is just simply ask, what was the most expensive item in the pile? And surprisingly, they might actually point to an item that has actually no real value, but to them it's valuable because it's a collector piece or it's something that they remember from their childhood. And if you can remove that one item, you can now discount the rest of that pile. So don't be afraid if they throw out a huge number for a pile. Just say, hey, what's the most expensive item in here? And then they might say, oh, well, I was thinking $50 on this. And you're like, wow, like that's not even worth $20. I have no problem removing that. And then let's see what the price is now. Number 8, no prices is a good thing. No prices at a yard sale typically means that the people haven't thought through how much they're going to charge for the items. If they haven't put thought into it, it means that they probably haven't spent the time to look it up. They don't know the real value of it, and they're just there to get rid of things. This might have been a last minute sale. This might be just them trying to clear things out before they donate it or throw it away. Whatever it is, I typically find that the best yard sales are ones without price tags. Now you might be thinking, well, how do I know what the price is? And like, isn't it awkward? And what if I want a bunch of things? I have to sit there and ask like, how much for this? How much for that? How much for this? No, I don't recommend doing that. What I like to do is if I don't see any prices and it's a sale that I think I'm gonna wanna buy something at, I'm going to walk up and I'm going to find one item that I know the price point for. And it might not even be an item that I'm interested in buying. I'm going to hold it up and I'm going to say, how much for this item? And they're going to shoot me a number, $1, $2, or they might say something like $20, $30. Whatever they say now gives me an idea of what they're going to be charging for almost everything else there. If they're the $1 or $2 kind of yard sale, then they're probably going to carry that price point through on most of their items. Where if they're like, oh, that's a $20 item, and then you're like, okay, I guess they actually did look things up or they know what things are worth, but they just didn't take the time to put price tags on it. So that's two different kinds of sales there, but the easiest way to determine what sale you're at is just to simply ask on something. I typically make it something that I'm not even interested in. That way I can put it down and not worry about whether they said something high or low. It just gives me an idea. These are also great sales to implement the pile sale at. So if you pick something up and say, hey, how much on this? And they say $1 or $2, and you see a bunch of other things that you would be willing to pay $1 or $2, make the pile and then say, hey, are we $1 or $2 on everything? And just say, I have 10 things at what, $1 or $2, so $10, $20, whatever. You can start negotiations from there. Number 9, the put down. So this kind of goes with the no price tag, where you have to ask what the item is worth. However, the put down is a great strategy, but it can only be implemented if you are the only person at the yard sale. So what I like to do here is say, hey, how much for this? And this is an item that I'm actually interested in buying. But as I'm asking how much it is, I'm putting it down. I want them to see me putting it down as if I'm not actually interested in it. If I take the item and I'm holding on to this item, they now think that I'm going to buy that item. I want them to see me say, how much for this? And before they even gave me a number, I'm putting it back down. You can also do this by pointing, but whatever way you can non-verbally say, hey, like, I want to know what the price is, but I really don't like it, is a great way to start the negotiation. The worst way to do this would be to pick up, say, a Sony Walkman and say, hey, how much for this vintage Sony Walkman? You would never want to say that, because now you know what the item is, you've told them what the item is, you've made it more valuable to them. So I would say, hey, how much for this, as I'm just putting it back down and moving on. I want to look like I'm not interested in this item. However, don't use this if there's other people at the yard sale, because as soon as you start picking things up, other people want to come look at it. It's a weird thing, but like if I'm at a yard sale and I bend over and I start going through a box, other people magically want to go through that box. If I pick something up, someone else now sees that item, they want to come over and look at that item. So if you're actually interested in purchasing the item and you put it down, there's a really good chance that if there's someone else at that yard sale, that they're going to at least come and touch that item. It's like the rule of attraction. Like anything that you're attracted to, other people want to know why you were attracted to it, so they're going to come and at least look at it. And if they're another reseller and it's a good item, they might actually grab it while you were trying to negotiate on it. So I only use this tactic when I'm the only person at the yard sale. The put down method works so well, especially if you can walk away. So if you can put it down and walk away, or even like turn your back and look at the other table or something, it really shows the person that you're not interested in it. I've actually had cases where I ask how much on an item and it's outside of my margins and I'm not really wanting to negotiate on it. So instead I say, okay, no problem, I'll think about it, and I put it down and I actually start walking back to my car, like not as a negotiation tactic, like just because I'm ready to leave. And the people will either yell to me or they'll actually even come over to my car and say, hey, like I could actually do this much on it. And they'll start negotiating against themselves because they see that sale leaving. Number 10, ask for the throw-in. So the throw-in can work really well if there's two items that you want. So if you find two items and one of them is $10 and the other one is $2, you might pick up the $10 item and say, this is $10, right? And they'll say yes, or if there's no price on it, say how much, and they say $10. And then you grab that $2 item and say, would you do both for 10? This doesn't seem to work as well for me personally. I tend to find that people seem to think that they're giving away a free item, even though you're just combining the price point on two things. However, it's worth trying, especially if the second item that you're asking about is something that you might not really be that interested in. It maybe just barely meets your profit margins, or it could help out the deal. But if there's two items that you really want, I tend not to do the throw-in method just because for some reason people think that you're trying to get something for free. But it can work in certain situations, especially if they have multiples of the same item. If there's 4 of them and they're asking $10 on each of them, you could say, would you do all 4 for 30 and try to negotiate that way? Number 11, give a reason. If you're going to ask to pay less, have a reason why you need to pay less. And the funny thing here is that the reason doesn't have to be legit. And I've actually found that the funnier or the more made up the reason, the better it works. So I'll say something like, hey, would you do $5 on this? Because man, if I come home with another one of these, my wife is going to kill me. But at least I can tell her I got a good deal on it. Or like the guy in my story earlier, where he said he wanted the extra $5 for beer money. He probably wasn't going to actually go buy beer with it, but he gave me a reason why he needed that extra $5. So come up with some great reasons. Another one I like to use is, I really want to buy this. However, I can only afford $10 because I actually promised to take my dog out to a nice restaurant later, and I'm not going to be able to afford to do both. And it kind of just throws people off. They are like, what? And you're like, well, my dog, I was taking out to a fancy restaurant and it's going to be really expensive. So I was seeing if I could make a deal on this so I could afford to take my dog out. Now, some people might not get the humor and they might actually just think you're crazy. And that can actually work too, because they're like, I don't know what this guy's talking about. Let's just give him that item so he like leaves our yard sale. Or they might actually laugh. And when people laugh and they start to have more fun, they're more likely to give you better deals. So do me a favor and come up with some creative reasons why you should get a discount on an item and leave them in the comments below. Number 12, pay cash. I don't even know what to say about this. Like, if you're at a yard sale, you should be paying cash. I see other resellers out and they pull out their phone and they're like, do you do Venmo? Do you do Cash App? Or whatever. But there is such an advantage to paying cash at yard sales. I don't understand why, if you're a reseller going to yard sales, why you don't have cash on hand. It is a complete game changer. Credit card companies literally made credit cards so that when you swipe a credit card, that you don't have to hand anything over to the cashier, so you don't feel like you're actually spending any amount of money. We want the opposite effect here. If someone's giving us their item, we want to give something to them in return. Sending them a Venmo is not the same as putting cold hard cash in their hand. The other reason I like to use cash is it speeds up my process. While you're busy over there sending the Venmo and waiting for that to be processed, I handed them the money and I'm moving on to the next yard sale. There is so much advantage to paying in cash. Another great way is if the item say is $10, I'll actually pull out a 5 in my hand and have the 5 and the item and walk up to them and say, hey, would you do 5 on it? And I'm literally holding the $5 out. This shows them that they're actually going to get something that they want. They want this $5 bill that's in my hand. And all they have to do is say yes to the deal and they're getting it. It's instant gratification. They're instantly going to get that $5. It works really, really well. So I'm not sure why more resellers don't go this route. The other advantage is if you're showing up to yard sales super early, sometimes they don't have change. So me, I literally will have at least $100 in just single bills so that I can pay exact change. And the reason is speed, so that I can actually pay that $7 and not wait for them to try to find the extra 3 to give me back, or the extra 13 if I'm paying with a 20. But the other reason is early in the morning, a lot of people that are having yard sales don't have change. So I've actually had it where I'm at a yard sale and I overhear her say to someone, oh, well, I don't have change to break that 20. And I have an item over here that I'm interested in, and I have a bunch of ones. So I walk over and say, hey, I can help you break that, but would you do 5 on this? They're almost certainly, as long as it's a reasonable offer, going to accept that offer, because they now get to close 2 deals. They get to give change to that guy over there, and they got the change from me and sold another item. I've heard people say, hey, we have to run to the bank to get some change or whatever. And I might say, hey, you have 30 on this. Would you be willing to do 20? And I can pay you all in one so that you have some change for the rest of the day. They will say yes to that, just so they don't have to make a bank run. Number 13, bonding. Now, you might think it's better to play dumb at a yard sale and pretend like, oh, I don't know what a video game collection is. I don't know how much those vintage G.I. Joes are. I don't know how much those Pokemon cards are worth. If you actually know what it's worth and they're clearly a collector, it is 10 times better to bond with them over the items than sit there and pretend to be dumb. Now, this doesn't always work. However, if they're specifically a collector and they're really into these items, and you actually know enough about these items to have a conversation about them, you can start bonding with the person, and they're more likely to give you a better deal. There is no better way to negotiate with someone than to get them super excited and super interested. So if you can talk to them and say, wow, like, you have an awesome collection here. Wow, like, how long have you been collecting? And you just start bringing up all these memories and everything. You might think that this is going to go the other way, of them saying, well, you know what, I actually want to keep this. No, they've decided that they want to sell it. But the key here is they want to sell it to someone that's going to appreciate it as much as you do. So being able to have those conversations about things requires the knowledge, but it also requires the effort. It takes some time to sit there and bond with someone over the item and say, hey, I remember this in the 90s when I was growing up. This is super cool. I remember this from my childhood, or this is going to look great in my collection, or whatever it is. If you can genuinely bond with the person over the item, you're going to get a better deal than the person that says, would you take 200 for the whole thing? Because they're going to look at that person and say, well, obviously he's a reseller, and he doesn't even care about the items. It's okay if you tell them that you're a reseller. I don't hide the fact that I'm a reseller. I don't go out and scream, hey, I'm a reseller here. But if people ask me, I will be honest and say, yeah, I resell. That doesn't even scare people away. What scares people away is thinking that their beloved items are going to someone that doesn't appreciate them, is going to throw them in the back of the truck and make a mess out of them. Take care of the items, bond with the people over the items, and you'll be surprised at what kind of deals you can get, even with people that collect the items and know exactly what they're worth. Number 14, silence. Yeah, it's super powerful and it's super important. And the great thing about silence is it can be used on its own as a negotiation tool, or it can be used with other negotiation tactics. Silence is so powerful for negotiations that I typically use it no matter what. Even if I'm actually willing to pay the full price for the item, I'm going to give it a few seconds of silence just to see if I can get a few extra dollars off. People are so uncomfortable with silence and their own thoughts that they will literally negotiate against themselves over just a few seconds of silence. The key here is to not be super awkward about it and not be sitting there for 5 minutes staring off into space. I like to just count in my head and make it look like I'm doing some kind of math or really thinking deeply about it. Don't go to the extreme, because then they're going to be like, this weirdo like won't leave my yard sale kind of thing. But if someone throws out a number, give it a little bit of room to breathe. Just sit there for a couple seconds and see what they say. A lot of times when you say, how much for this? They'll say something like $10, and you just give it a few seconds of silence and they say, or I'm open to offers. Or 5? Does that sound better? Something like that will be the response from just a few seconds of silence. It's going to take some time for you to get used to it and be willing to stand there in silence, but it's a super powerful tool that you need for negotiations. Before we get to the final tip and the most powerful tool so that you never lose another negotiation, I have one favor to ask. If you guys have been enjoying this video and you want me to create more content, do me a huge favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Number 15, walk away. This sounds kind of silly, but At the end of the day, if you're out there and you're yard selling purely for reselling, not because you personally like going out yard selling, but because you're running a reselling business and you're out to buy inventory to resell online, the best and most powerful tool that you can use is to walk away. Now, this tool is super simple, but it's very hard to execute. We get attached to our emotions. We start to say, well, this item's worth so much. This item's going to sell so quick. This item's so cool. I love picking up vintage video games. Whatever it is, you're going to try to convince yourself to buy the item. If the price point ain't right and you can't negotiate it down lower, walk away. There's no point in picking up a bunch of inventory that you can't make a profit on if your goal is to run a reselling business. Now, if you're also a collector and you're out collecting things, that's a different story. Obviously, you're going to have emotions attached to it. But if you're out purely for the reselling business, I don't understand why you would ever lose a negotiation. The only way to lose a negotiation is to pay too much for the item. If you pay too much for the item and you can't make a profit on it, you've now lost the negotiation. I don't care that they were asking $1,000, you got it down to 500, but you can only sell it on eBay for 200. You still lost that negotiation. You should have walked away. I don't care that it was super cool. I don't care that it sells super quick. I don't care that, wow, it sold for $200. You still lost $300. You have to remove the emotion and be strong enough to walk away. If you've enjoyed this video, I think you're going to love this one. So go ahead and give it a click.